everybody, and we're on the air. Welcome to Everything's Better in Space. It's the sci-fi panel where P, Abby, JM, and Henry will share their thoughts on writing good science fiction. I'm Zoe, and I'll be moderating this discussion. Before we get started, I'd like to remind our viewers that if you'd like a chance to win a prize pack of Wattpad coins, good for unlocking paid stories, write the phrase "We thrive together" along with your Wattpad name into the chat window. One entry per person, please. Now, let's talk about inspiration. P, what inspired you to write science fiction?
So my first inspiration came from Patrick Ness's Chaos Walking trilogy, and I loved how social issues were kind of put together in a futuristic alien world. I thought that was really clever and inspired me to put social issues into my own sci-fi writing. I was also inspired by my university lecturer who said science fiction isn't about predicting the future, it's about looking at today and what may happen if we do or do not change certain elements of our society.
Yeah, that sounds very inspirational. Abby, Abby, what has inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just grew up with like both fantasy and science fiction. You know, I started reading the Wizard of Oz series when I was 6 years old, and all through college, high school, and all that so forth. I was watching Star Trek. I was watching a lot of superhero films like the X-Men's, and The Incredibles is like one of my favorite films of all time. And just I grew up with Michael Crichton, William Slater, and a lot of science fiction writers as well. And big epic fantasy series like The Wheel of Time. And yeah, so for me, it's like, I think with speculative fiction, like otherworldly fiction where it's not in our world, it allows us to take social issues and like exaggerate them and like re-examine them through the lens of something that's, you can kind of like tease out one issue and then just really exaggerate it and then see how it's explored. And I think I just picked that up from watching a lot of it and reading a lot of it.
JM, share with us your inspirations for sci-fi.
Well, the reason I got into sci-fi is that Will Wheaton is hot. We are not a big family of readers. I'm not entirely certain how I became a writer because from the minute that I could read my own novels, I had to read my own bedtime stories to myself. But Star Trek was something we did every Friday night, pizza, Star Trek, and enjoying the stories as a family. And that got me into fandom. So from Star Trek, it was Sailor Moon, Forever Knight, Dracula the series, Stargate, moving onwards. And that got me into fan fiction, which got me into writing. And one of the really nice things about fan fiction and science fiction in general, as P and Abby have said, science fiction is not about then and there. It's about us and now, but we set it then and there. And that's one of the reasons I really like writing science fiction, fantasy, and spec fic, because I can talk about all of those things in a way that isn't set now.
Right. And Henry, what have been your inspirations?
I guess as a young boy, it was Star Wars. Little boy didn't love Star Wars and the lightsabers, but yeah, as I got older and went into school, I think I had a literature teacher that introduced me to Ray Bradbury and Asimov and Orwell, and those. I mean, the world building and the messages those authors portrayed in those stories really grabbed me and really entered me into the genre and made me love it.
There's a lot to love. So what makes good science fiction? What makes it a good story? Abby, let's have you tell us.
Yeah. I mean, so as I said before, just taking like some kind of issue and teasing it out and exaggerating it, I think that's one thing. Another thing is like with science fiction in particular, you can kind of see like some kind of technology or some kind of new thing has happened in the world and it causes a sea change, which just has ripple effects through the entire society. It changes the way humans interact with each other, or people, if they might be aliens, but the way people interact with each other, or the way they deal with the world around them. And so no matter what it is, like if it's Jurassic Park, you've got bioengineering changes everything. If it's the Matrix, it's like neural nets have changed everything. So of course, there's like some tropes, I guess, that are very common, like time travel is possible, aliens visit us. Twitter has installed something in everyone's brains in a neural net. And then, of course, the basics of good storytelling. You got to have that. So, yeah.
And JM, what do you think are some elements of a good science fiction story?
Well, I think something that people really forget when they're writing science fiction is that the second part of that word is fiction. So yeah, you can do the science, and you can do the science telling, and you can figure a really cool way to make your time travel device work, or a really neat way for the propulsion engines to work on your spaceship. But you have to remember that while the science is cool and it's the MacGuffin that moves the plot forward, the point of these sorts of stories are the fiction side of it. You can't forget the people and the culture and the characters. And I find that a lot of new writers focus so much on the world building that they actually kind of miss the fact that they're supposed to be telling a story about a person.
Yeah, very true. And Henry, what do you think makes a good science fiction story?
Yeah, I'll build off what Jam just said. Yeah, it's good world building, but it's not so much world building that it gets in the way of the story. I think we as authors maybe spend so much time creating this world and all its intricacies. We really want to then put that on the page, and you don't need to, because it is about character. I mean, you just need to put enough to have them interested without. Yeah, you don't need 10 pages because that's how you researched it. One might do.
Yeah, no info dumping, please. All right, P, what do you think? What makes a good science fiction story?
So I agree with everything everyone else has said. You need enough world building to make it science fiction, but you also need to focus on the story, the plot, the characters, and the moral underneath. But the thing I think is most important is the hook. What makes your science fiction story stand out? What makes it different from everything else that's been written? And finding that and nailing it down into a sentence or two is what's going to give you good foundation to build your sci-fi story around it.
Yes, those are all good points. So let's go to our next question. What message do you want your story to tell? And JM, let's hear it from you.
Oh, I mean, so I want to actually build on what P just said. Figure out what your hook is, and when you're thinking about what your story is about, imagine that that voice acting voice in a world where dragons are real. Do they need jobs because they have a hoard of gold? Imagine that in your head, and that will help you hook into what it is that you're trying to do and what moral you're trying to give. And we're not saying it has to be a fairy tale. We don't have to have a Little Red Riding Hood girl should not be walking alone at night moral at the end embedded in every story. But if you know what that hook is, and if you can say it in one sentence, then that's what's really going to help you translate what you want to say through your characters to your reader.
Yes, that is so true. And Henry, what message do you want your story to tell?
Optimistically, I want to give a positive one. I think we've all kind of said it, that science fiction, you build a world, and maybe there's an issue we want to tackle based on this world, whether it's society or climate change or just man in general and how we relate to one another. But we use this device to maybe try and send a positive message, how we can all improve or learn or just be better at the end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Just be better. I would like to be better myself.
Grimdark can be exhausting.
Oh, yes.
After the last few years, we're all over Grimdark.
Yeah. And P, share us your thoughts.
Yeah, so messages in sci-fi have happened since practically the beginning of sci-fi. When you think back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and it's all about the warnings of science and playing God and galvanization all kind of come into play. And so I like looking at what things I find important today And for me, that's talking about mental health. So I always include positive mental health portrayals and stories within my writing. And the other big thing for me is climate change. So I'm straying into the area of, I believe the term is cli-fi. So it's science fiction meets climate change and you smash it together. I'm afraid that does tend to go the depressing route, but we need to do more.
Yeah, I agree. And finally, Abby, what message do you want your story to tell?
Yeah, I mean, I'm writing this giant epic. It's this Torth series, so 7 books, and it's in their big books, but we won't talk about that. But yeah, it's for me, like one of the biggest things I've got going on is like emergent social phenomenon, such as like dogpiling, peer pressure, online bullying, mob rule, and how like peer pressure can kind of get people to act in terrible or beneficial ways. So my series really goes into that quite a lot. Also kind of exploring individualism versus collectivism, and just like the ins and outs, strengths and weaknesses of each. Interpersonal power dynamics, I've got a lot of that going on. And freedom, like including the freedom of thought versus enslavement and oppression, and justice, always a good one to have in your stories.
Sounds good, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's say someone wants to write sci-fi. What are some of the most important things to consider before writing sci-fi? Henry, let's start with you.
I think it's the world you want to build, and the story you want to tell. Are you going to go the hard science route, like an Andy Weir type, and are you going to figure out the orbits of Mars and Earth and how to get here and get there, or is it just going to be softer? I mean, yeah, obviously you're building a world and there's technology in it, but you need to know all the physics behind. You have an engineer to write your story, but then, I mean, after that, it really is just, I think, as you mentioned earlier, it's fiction. I mean, you got to have a good story, a good character, a plot, the hook, all your basic story elements don't change from genre to genre. It's just, what kind of setting are you putting in?
Very true. P, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so building upon what Henry was saying about hard versus soft sci-fi, it's more than just how what you research. So you might think, oh, hard sci-fi, hard sciences, so your physics, chemistry, mechanics, versus soft being more anthropology and social sciences. It's more about how you write it on the page, how you put your research into text that is either easily digestible, so you kind of blur over how the mechanics work in technical terms and say it works because it does.
It just does.
Or whether you go down into the details. And it's entirely up to you and your writing style, because both forms exist and both are acceptable. It's your story. Write it.
That's right. It's your story. Abby, what do you think are some important things to consider?
Yeah, well, one thing is, I'd say kind of research the industry. Sci-fi and fantasy both together are just a massive part of the fiction industry. And there are so many genres and so many crossovers that are possible. So it's like with sci-fi, it's like game lit, superheroes, space opera, hard sci-fi, techno thrillers. Those all generally fall under the umbrella of sci-fi. And then there's also crossover with fantasy, YA, romance, and that sort of thing. So there's just so many blends that are possible. So know your audience and know the industry, and just research it.
Good advice. GM, anything you would like to add?
Just sort of building on what we've already said is, when you're world building, do your research, but don't forget that world building is more than just a map. Like, think about the culture. So if you're going to build a culture and it's going to be on top of a mountain or under a mountain or beside a river, think about how the geography of the world you're building would actually affect the culture. For example, if you are creating a world with no France, does your world have a French braid?
Wow.
Or French kissing? I'm sure they have all those things, but what do they call them instead? So just think about those sorts of things. When you're building the world, think about how that world you're building would affect the culture and the way that people would interact with one another. The idioms, the morals, the taboos, the physical gestures that people would do. I mean, if we don't have the word okay, what does this hand gesture mean? Right?
Yeah, those are good question. All right. So it looks like we've got some questions from the audience. Let's start with this one. Can you write a sci-fi novel mixed with fantasy? Also, does it have to be hard science fiction to get readers' attention in that genre?
Yes and no.
No, I agree. I'm writing my series is more or less science fantasy, although it's hard to brand sometimes. Like the industry is kind of fickle about these things, and people will argue till the cows come home about what is science fiction, what is fantasy.
So true. Yeah, whether or not science fiction and fantasy should be in the same genre lumped together or separated is big debate there too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's definitely blurred lines. Like, you can't put things in boxes. And in terms of whether it has to be hard sci-fi in order to be considered science fiction, the answer is absolutely not. You can if you want. You also don't have to. Both have seen trends in previous years, depending on what people are feeling. Sometimes hard sci-fi tends to be more popular. Other times it's the soft sci-fi. So it goes by market as well.
It does. All right. Got another question here. Could you write a sci-fi novel with alien races not always being the threat or the villain? For example, Transformers.
My debut novel, they came as refugees instead of invaders. And it was named one of Publishers Weekly Best Books of the Year. So I guess people want to read it. So yes.
Absolutely, yes. All right. All right. How about, got another question. What are the best ways to brand or categorize your story?
Big question.
Next question.
Start broad and then work yourself down as you do the research. So like what Key was saying, she does science fiction and then down to, what did you call it? Cli-fi?
Cli-fi, yeah. Climate
See, I would call that
change
solar
sci-fi.
punk.
Yeah.
There's multiple, just find your way down the funnel until you kind of find the one. But if you don't find that perfect term, make one up. Cli-fi. That's great. It's the first time I've heard that.
I've heard that one. Yeah, that's yeah.
All right. We've got another question from the audience. So comedy and sci-fi seem to be popular bedfellows. How do you feel about genre mixing in sci-fi? And which genre would you love to mash with sci-fi?
That's
Henry,
a good
you
question.
answer the question yet?
I see a lot of horror sci-fi as well.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I love all of it personally. The one I'm doing, honestly, I'd say it's epic fantasy. Because I do have kind of like a large ensemble cast, and they kind of are on a quest to defeat some evil oppressors. So, I mean, it does have spaceships and aliens as well, but yeah.
Okay. Anyone else want to chime in there?
Yeah,
I
I'd
love
love to do
comedy and sci-fi. Yeah,
I love
great
laughing.
genres to mash. We can do anything.
Have we had any science fiction crossover with vampire yet?
There has been
Ooh.
Blind Sight.
Yeah.
Peter Watts.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, I read something in high school which was about vampires on a spaceship. Dean Koontz or something?
Vampires in space.
There's also Amish vampires in space. It was an indie. Yep, it was an indie series that did pretty well 5 or 6 years ago.
Wow.
Everything's better in space.
That's right. You put vampires and Amish in space, and it's automatically better.
Why not? Why not?
Okay. Let's see. We've got another one here. Can you pants a sci-fi, or do you need to put some thought into a plan before you start, like plotting versus pantsing?
There's a great Neil Gaiman quote that says, for your first draft, write everything that happens. In the second draft, go back and make it look like you meant it to be like that the whole time. Or something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
If you're a pantser, pants it. If you have to stop halfway through writing a scene to look up the temperature of the sun, then do it. But write how you need to write. There's no rules.
Yeah, I'm a pantser myself, and so I mean I've tried plotting, and just my brain doesn't quite work that way. So I'll pause to do the research I need, but I just kind of make things.
Fix it in post.
Yeah, I would say like I do kind of plot for sure, but it's always a blend for me. I mean, I do a lot of daydreaming, and the daydreams are kind of pantsing. So
yeah, it's the
It's
subsequent
hard. You have
edits.
to go back and rewrite more if you don't plot
It's
out
true.
a sci-fi.
My first draft is usually me plotting. So it's the subsequent drafts that form it into the shape like it was intended all along.
Yeah, I'm a heavy plotter, but I would still have to stop. And if I needed a certain piece of research, I would research it then and there. You don't know when you're going to write where your mind may take you.
So true. Okay, I've got another question. What do you want to see more of in sci-fi? Like, what would it take to really shake up the genre?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I would personally like to see more social commentary sci-fi. I mean, there are a few good ones out there, but they're rare. They're kind of hard to find. And of course, I'm writing about like more or less like online bullying taken to its natural conclusion, super extreme. I'd like to see more of that.
Anyone else have any opinions?
Kind of jumping on something Henry mentioned previously, more happier sci-fis. We don't necessarily all have to turn into the apocalypse or anything.
Yeah.
And I know they are out there, and I'm finding them. But
yeah, I think isn't there a genre called solar something for like just the happier, more optimistic sci-fi?
It's hope punk.
Hope punk.
Yeah.
All right.
I would like to see more queer books that aren't about being queer. I'm really sick of picking up a book with a gay main character and the whole book is about the character being gay. Can't the character just happen to be gay, please?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just happens.
We just happen to exist.
That would be nice. So it's not like the central focus.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got a lot of questions from our audience. All right. We've got another one here. I'm planning on writing a sci-fi, but I feel my brain cannot comprehend scientific topics. Do you have any tips on how to easily write sci-fi?
So for the time travel, in my debut novel, I had the main character make a device with a big red button. And when someone said, "How does it work?" he said, "You press the button," and it works.
Huh? Just keep it simple, right?
Yeah. I'll go the opposite way and say I consulted with an astrophysicist.
Have the science guy give you the science, right?
Yeah. I bothered a whole bunch of astrophysicists online. I was like, help.
Yeah. So I guess either find experts or just simplify the technology in your story.
Google is my friend. And
yes.
if I don't understand what is actually on the page, then you just add "for kids" at the end of what you're researching, and hopefully there's a simplified version.
Right. Okay. How about another question? Do you think sci-fi or another genre mixed in is a bigger draw for Wattpad readers for your stories? So I guess mixing sci-fi with something else, would that attract more Wattpad readers or just plain sci-fi?
I mean, if you can make it a quadrillion billionaire space lord,
Yes, I do think that exists.
Werewolf.
Yeah.
Yes, werewolf, yes.
Yeah. Right.
It depends. If you've got a readership for, say, romance already and you want to go into sci-fi, then do sci-fi romance and then you can draw readers in. But if it's your first starting out project, then go for it. Merge with whatever you want and then the readers will come to you.
That's right.
Have realistic expectations for the audience on Wattpad. I think even they mentioned that in the Wattpad behind the scenes thing, that when they're looking at stars, right, there's different audiences and numbers with those audiences. So just have realistic expectations. Not going to be a million read view on Wattpad.
Mm-hmm. And you can never be all things to everybody. So write what's your jam, and then people will flock to you if that's their jam too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got a climate change question here. Does sci-fi world building have to be about global extreme changes, or it can be only about one region or area of the world? Does it have to be global, or can it be regional?
Absolutely. Make it regional. Do what you know. So when I talk about climate change, I'm looking specifically what might happen to London. And my story is entirely based around London and what could have happened. And in case it isn't clear, I am UK based. So I've not just picked a random city I don't know anything about.
Yeah, don't write about things you don't know anything about.
Or do lots of research and add
Yes.
points at the end.
And yeah, after your research, then you will know things about the thing you're writing.
Yes.
Okay, another question. Sci-fi seems to have gone really dark in the past few years. Do you think optimistic sci-fi is due for a comeback?
Yes.
I mean, yeah,
Everything goes in cycles, right?
I personally like that's what I seek out. I'm also very burned out on the grim dark thing. So yeah.
We've
Yeah.
had enough of sad stories over the past couple of years. I didn't want to mention anything about the pandemic, the curse word, but yeah, let's have some good news and good stories.
Yeah, some light at the end of this tunnel.
Yeah.
All right, so let's ask everyone, why do you choose sci-fi as a genre? What is its appeal to you?
I tend to get very bored with contemporary stories.
At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Mabel sliced lemons for
Which is a nice story, but the novel I'm editing right now is last year's Nano, is a contemporary romance set in St. Catharines, Ontario, which is where I went to school. And it's a queer love story between a pan character and a bi character. And one of the characters just happens to be a dragon. Why? Because I thought it would screw with the world building in a really interesting way. What does colonialism look like? What does empire building look like when the Queen of England is a frickin' dragon? It's Queen Elizabeth I still. What does that trickle down for the world building? So for me, I get to tell all the contemporary stories that I want to tell, but I get to also, because this book is yeah, there's a dragon, but it's actually a book about agency and colonialism and settler accountability. How do I, as a white person, engage with what was done in my name in the past? And that's what the book is really about. But like I said earlier, then and there now and here by then and there. So let's put some dragons in.
Love dragons. Any thoughts, Henry, on why you choose sci-fi as a genre you write?
We all read or write to escape, so why not escape as far away from my reality as I can? Yeah, let's get far away so I can escape and have some fun.
It's all about the fun.
Yes. Oh, definitely.
Yeah. P, how about you?
Yeah, escapism, just kind of letting my imagination run wild. And it was also science fiction attracted me for being able to portray a message without standing up and yelling it, and actually hiding it underneath a slightly more enjoyable, one might say, kind of cover.
Yeah, it's nice to disguise your message in something that's fun and enjoyable.
Yes.
And Abby, what about you?
Yeah, I'd repeat what everyone said. I mean, escapism and hiding the message. And like for me, just being able to disguise, real world themes and exaggerate them and look at them in a new way, a new light, because if everything's different, then you can really delve into some issue that in our world is just a tiny minor footnote, but somewhere else it's terrible. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, looks like that is the time we've got for this panel. The next panel up is Agents and Business, Finding and Keeping the Right Agent for You. There's going to be a lot of interest in that one, so don't miss that. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and thank you all the panelists for so many great, insightful answers. And goodbye for now, I guess. Thank you.